Greetings, everyone, and welcome to this latest installment of the Senturus Knowledge Series. Today, we will be presenting on the topic of why bother with data governance. So our agenda today, after some quick introductions, we'll talk about why you want to do data governance. Then we'll cover some warning signs of complacency. We'll talk about what does data governance do? Discuss the data governance process, and then stick around through the quick but informative Senturus overview for those of you who may not be familiar with our organization. Some almost entirely always free additional resources, and stick around through that for the Q&A. Quick introductions here. So joining us today, I'm pleased to be joined by my colleague, my esteemed colleague, Sean Alpe, who is a Microsoft BI Senior Architect with us here at Senturus. Sean is well-versed across the entire Microsoft BI stack and its wide range of offerings, having built ETL, data warehouse, reporting, and analytics solutions from the ground up. In his various development and architecture roles, Sean often serves as the client's project manager, and business analyst, partnering directly with their team to gather requirements and deliver insights. My name is Mike Weinhauer. I'm a director here at Senturus and have the pleasure of being the MC for these presentations. So with that, I'm going to hand the microphone over to Sean for the core of the presentation. Sean, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mike. All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for attending. I'm going to start with the adage here that data governance is hard. You're here because it's hard. This is a difficult topic. We have seen folks struggle with this initiative. I have been directly involved many times in having it be established at various organizations. And I just want to honor up front the fact that it is a difficult topic. So thank you for attending. According to Gartner, you may be familiar with them. They are a technology research firm. They claim that enterprises are increasingly pushing for growth through digital transformation. And this puts more pressure on the existing technical frameworks the organizations carry. We definitely see an increasing gap between the frameworks that organizations have been leveraging for a while and the needs the business units are placing on those. This manifests itself in many different aspects, but definitely data governance is a pain point for many organizations. Even top-tier organizations we see struggling to implement good data governance, but I really want to underscore the fact that they're doing it because it's worth doing. You may not be completely done or successful in the first phase of a governance project, but we definitely see that organizations of every size are attempting, or at least attempting, to implement data governance for their organization because of the need for digital transformation. So here's how we're going to be approaching governance. We'll talk about the warning signs of what I call data complacency, aka risk to an organization when folks start accepting data quality issues or access security issues, etc. We'll define data governance and we'll detail its purpose and value. We'll break down implementation into consumable chunks because I want to recognize, again, this is difficult. We really need to break it down into something we can understand, but we will be focused on the high level. This is not a tips and tricks webinar. We'll definitely be approaching this more from a thought leadership place. This will be filtered through my lens. I'm a business intelligence architect. I'm not a security guru. I'm not an admin person. I'm not an executive. I'll try to be inclusive of those perspectives, but definitely know that my lens is that of someone implementing business intelligence initiatives for an organization. So that's the slant I'm taking when it comes to data governance. That said, I want you to filter this talk through your lens. What that I say applies to you and your org, and most importantly, how do you disagree with me? Your mileage may vary. I really don't think that you'll agree with everything that I say because this is such a tough and ephemeral topic. I want you to be thinking critically about what I say that you agree with and what you disagree with, and come away from this feeling like you engaged with the topic. Yeah. All right, so with that said, let's jump to data complacency, aka this is fine. You may be familiar with these two panels of a little dog sitting in a fire, and he says this is fine. This is actually the first two panels of a really great webcomic called Gun Show. I just want to step through the rest of the panels real quick. The dog says, I'm okay with the events that are unfolding currently, takes a sip of his coffee, puts it down, and says, that's okay. things are going to be okay. And then, of course, his face melts off. This is a great allegory, I suppose, for what I see in various organizations when it comes to how they approach their data. They see the issues all around them, but they accept them because they don't think that they can actually change the situation. And I feel so strongly about this that I actually have a plushie of this dog. This is a picture of me, a plushie of this dog sitting on my desk to remind me at all times to not become complacent with data, but with everything in my life, but definitely data governance as well. All right, some warning signs of data complacency. These are some phrases I've heard at various organizations. For example, why won't IT fix these data inaccuracies? I've heard business units say this all the time. They tell me how frustrated they are with the folks who own the various tools and technologies at their organization not having skin in the game for fixing their data quality issues. But often this is illustrative of the fact that the very folks who were saying this don't feel ownership over the inaccuracy of the data themselves. It's fine that the data doesn't agree across systems as long as it's quote unquote directionally accurate. I love this phrase so much. I've heard it so many times. As long as it doesn't matter that we're off by a few hundred basis points or a few percentage points, as long as all the data is larger or smaller than what we expect across the board, then it's fine. It's what we might call directionally accurate. We can still make decisions on it because it's all wrong in the same direction. It's not fine, the data quality is kind of bad, but it's been decided it's too hard or expensive to solve. This "it's been decided" is a very interesting passive voice where there's really no one who said it's too hard or expensive to solve, but somehow people have cognitive dissonance. They don't like that the data is bad, but the only way that they can come to terms with it is if they feel that some ephemeral power that be decided that it's unfixable, placing the blame or displacing onto some party that doesn't actually exist. Is this net sales number the finance version or the operations one? Oh wait, it's probably the marketing one. So often we see measures, different measures with the same name, living in an organization across the various business units. This usually is illustrative of the fact that an organization has become somewhat siloed. And in this example here, finance, ops, and marketing all have different definitions for net sales. They might be all similar, but they're just different enough where if you just put the word net sales on a report without calling out whose definition it is, it could actually be very confusing and actually lead to bad decision making. Finally, someone deleted the entire main reporting folder again. This is an example of bad access controls, bad security, where we've given someone too much access to something and they deleted the production artifact. I've seen this happen many times. And it implies that, well, it happened once and we didn't fix it, and then it occurred a second time or maybe a 10th time. These are all risks to an organization. When we become complacent and accept data quality being the way it is, data governance being the way it is, then we continue to foster a non-data driven culture, and we continue to foster an acceptance of things that we know in our heart don't work. I want to challenge that. So what does data governance do? It pushes back on all of those things, all those themes we just talked about. First and foremost, it establishes the business as data owners, not IT. IT should be framed as the stewards of data. They are the ones who own the tools and technologies that may house data. They are therefore the stewards of the data that flows through those systems. They are not the owners of the information. The owners should be the folks who are generating and consuming the information. The business units of an organization should be the data owners. Finance, ops, accounting, marketing. These are folks who may be actually generating the data points, and their ownership is critical to the success of a data governance initiative, the accuracy of data, etc. Data governance positions data issues as cross-functional. If a particular business unit might be generating data, for instance, operations may own net sales, But if everyone across the organization is consuming it, then everyone's impacted if that data point is wrong. Data governance helps frame a data point as something we're all holding hands to own and consume. And if one business unit is generating faulty data, it really is the problem to be solved by the entire organization. Data governance treats data as an entity separate from its containers. We often see folks refer to data sets by the source system they come out of, but that's only one place that data might live. In a business intelligence initiative, we may see data flow across many systems before it gets to the eyeballs of consumers. And data governance definitely treats data separately from the things it lives in. We'll be talking more about this topic as we go. Data governance prioritizes measurements to define success and failure. Data governance is hard enough without, if you're lacking the ability to say, okay, this is how we succeeded, this defines that we met our goals, and this defines what we will do if we don't meet our goals. Without that, data governance just becomes that much harder. So it definitely prioritizes saying, okay, we're going to become this much more secure, we're going to become this much more available with our data, et cetera, and be able to look back to that and say, we met our goals or we did not meet our goals. Data governance reduces cost of time and money. Really, I feel strongly about this. I feel often that people think of data governance as a four-letter word, and if you spend the time to do data governance properly, the thinking goes, it's going to cost a lot of time, it's going to cost a lot of money, but I really feel strongly that to be proactive with data governance allows us to save these precious resources in a way that being reactive without it would cost us. I feel strongly that if you put the time in up front, it will absolutely save you 3x, 5x, 10x of these resources down the road. And finally, data governance, I believe, increases trust across the organization. This is a bit of an intangible, but data governance is an opportunity to take cold hard data and make it better. And with that evidence at hand that we were able to be cross-functional, work together to solve this problem, it helps foster a cross-functional culture, a data-driven culture, which therefore then leads to trust across business units, which will lead to benefits that are hard to describe or perhaps tangential to data governance, but definitely increase the potential success of an organization. So what is data governance? I'm going to give you my definition of data governance. If you ask 10 different people, they may give you 10 different definitions. I encourage you to disagree with aspects of this, but this is how I think of it, all right? Data governance is a framework for ensuring the availability, accuracy, and security of data across an organization. Okay, great. But you might immediately be thinking, well, what does that mean? Breaking this down into pieces, there's a lot of nouns and terms in here that we have to more fully define before we can fully understand this definition. You might first ask, well, what's a framework? This is a collection of ideas. It is not a technology necessarily. That might be a piece of the puzzle, but it is people and thoughts and processes and technologies all coming together to solve this issue. There's a bunch of other words. We're not going to go into all of them, but for instance, what does availability mean? What does accuracy mean? What does security mean? What does data mean? Et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of terms in here that we have to define in our organization. So the first point I'll make after I show you this definition is that data governance is a long series of definitions and discussions, putting on your detective hat, talking to people, understanding where they're coming from, resolving issues, coming to compromises, making sure you've made black and white out of the gray of data. This is a very important thing to do, and there's no substitute for it. Getting down to the brass tacks of what each thing means in your organization is absolutely critical to the success of a data governance initiative, and you'll be seeing me repeat that many other times as we go through this talk. Therefore, data governance requires thought leadership. You can't buy ideas off the shelf. If you could, you wouldn't be here. I know you're here because this is difficult and because data governance cannot be purchased as a technology. It requires having people, including you, invest in how to lead an organization through ideas, how to bring organization to this initiative. And it's not just a technology you can buy, which brings me to my next point. Data governance is not just a tool. Our process defines our platform, not the other way around. I feel so strongly about that. As a business intelligence architect, of course, I need to understand my tools cold, but I choose my tools and I use my tools based on ideas, organization that happens independent of the tools. Yes, data governance needs technology in order to be successful, but it flows out from the organization we install in the organization in order to then leverage those things for success. All right, so you might be wondering, how do we, do this? I'll answer that question with a question. How do you eat a huge Rice Krispie square? If you're Bart Simpson, you just go for it and you do it one bite at a time. It's super important to break down data governance into components. So we'll be framing the rest of our talk by distilling the concept down into 4 major pieces. First of all, there's process. How do you organize your organization? Take the how of this into the where, the what, the when, etc. There are the people. How do you organize your folks into teams with roles and responsibilities that can execute data governance? Your platform, what is your technology? What are your tools? The where of where things will land, where things will live. Your ideas are going to exist somewhere. So that's super important. The 4th piece, which almost sometimes goes overlooked with data governance, is the data itself. What is the definition of your data? Who owns it? How is it maintained, etc.? And of course, because all these things are interconnected, I won't be able to really talk about one without kind of referring to the rest of them. So I'll be starting with process. I'll be touching on the rest of them as I talk about process, and then I'll move to people. I'll be touching on the others. And by the time that we circle through all of these, I'll be talking less and less about each because it's all interconnected. All right, so let's start with process. We have to break our how down into W's. By W's, I mean why, what, when, who, and where. So we'll be stepping through each of these, but it's super important that as we move through these, you be thinking about how each of these sections results in documentation. And a point I want to make before we go any farther, super important, is that I am extremely tired of documentation being undervalued. When I said documentation, your eyes may or may not have rolled into the back of your head, because documentation often in an organization is a 4-letter word. A document is like a 400-page monolithic thing that doesn't actually tell you what's going on or how to do something. High-level, good, concise documentation can definitely exist. It's so critical to a good data governance initiative. I would encourage you to be thinking about how to do that as part of data governance. All right, let's start with the why. Guiding principles, a mission statement endorsed by your organization's leaders. This is a high-level document talking about what's going to foster a data-driven culture in your organization. This is going to be endorsed and sponsored by the folks who are your data champions. And we'll talk more about that when we get to a people section. Here's some examples of what you might find in the mission statement. We recognize data to be a valued and strategic enterprise asset. Our data shall have clearly defined accountability. Our data shall be well managed. These are high-level ideas. This is not exactly how you're going to do it. This is why you're doing it. And these are the values the organization wants to encourage across all levels. Moving into the what, this flows from that. These are your requirements. This is your clear scope of the what you wish to accomplish. What shall we accomplish? What data domains shall be included, like sales or labor or inventory, and more specifically, the data points in there, etc. What personas shall be included? These are the groups of people who touch the data, the executives, the managers, individual contributors, admins, analysts, etc. We'll be talking about personas more in the people section, but who will be considered as part of the data governance initiative? What shall define success and failure? We talked about that earlier. We're going to need measurements to say, this is how much more available we wish the data to be, how much more secure, and what shall we do if we don't meet those goals? How shall we fund this? Obviously, a very important piece of the puzzle. And what are the priority levels for all of these things? We can't just say this is all priority 1. We cannot boil the ocean. We're going to leverage priority levels in the next section when we decide what our roadmap is. This is a roadmap for the execution of the what. We're going to leverage the prioritization in that what section to determine our phases and our schedule. We might or might not be deciding an exact timeline, depending on what kind of methodology we're using for execution. Like if we're using perhaps an agile methodology where we're working in 2-week buckets, we may not say we're going to try to do this by June 1st, 2021. But it's important to bucket what we're trying to do into phases and have a rough kind of flow in terms of we're going to do this first and then this and then this, etc. What must be accomplished in phase one? Must is very important. Some things I know when you're thinking about how to improve data governance in your organization can be postponed. It's not that they should be postponed, everything's important, but what are the most important pieces that you want to absolutely rally around and say, look at the good work that we did. We can continue to carry this good work forward into future phases. Phases can be small. I believe strongly that 5 small phases will be faster than 1 big one. I see folks often say, well, we don't want to necessarily have to digest the overhead it might cost us to turn the key on 5 different phases. Why don't we just push it all into 1 or 2 phases, and then deployment and testing and UAT, all of these things would only have to be done once or twice. I fully believe that that kind of meta process is very important to step through and hone. And I feel strongly that by the time you get to the end of the 5th phase, it will have been faster than if you tried to bucket it all together. That's my opinion. The who, decision-making bodies and roles and responsibilities. These teams you're going to organize will devise the why and the what, and they're going to make it happen. You're going to need crystal clear roles and responsibilities defined for each person, each role, each group. We'll talk about this more later. You also need personas for all the categories of people that touch the data. We mentioned that a little while ago. We'll get more into that when we get into the people section. Finally, that leads us into the where, your tools, your technologies, your repositories, your diagrams, an architecture for all the tools that are going to be necessary to turn the key on these ideas that you have established in the preceding documents. This is your source systems, your code repositories, your document repositories, databases and data lakes, reporting interfaces, data management tools, security admin. The list goes on and on. Obviously, you need to have a host, a smattering of tools and technologies to do data governance well. But again, it's at the end of the chain. All of these things are prerequisites to deciding these things. You cannot let your tools define your tasks. And I'm going to say it like 3 or 4 more times by the end of this talk. All right, turning our attention over to people. I want to bring up a book that I think is one of the most important reads of the last 10 years for me. It's called The Secrets of Consulting. It's written by a guy named Gerald Weinberg. Even though it was written in the 80s, it's still super applicable to organizations today. He makes a ton of great points, but the point I want to bring up right now is that no matter how it looks at first, it's always a people problem. Technology issues, organization issues, everything under the sun when it comes to what I've seen as a consultant helping organizations comes down to, are people understanding each other? Is there a communication problem? Is there an organization issue? This is where to look to solve issues in an organization. Super important to figure out in a data governance initiative. And an important piece of that puzzle is ownership. I really feel strongly that data governance will fall on its face if there's not personal ownership across every level of an org that is implementing this initiative. So with that, I want to introduce to you some various teams that I have implemented in terms of data governance. The example I'll step you through is an organization of revenue of maybe a couple billion per year. Your organization might be larger than that. It might be much smaller than that. Your business unit may be very small. This can be tailored for any size. I've done it with smaller groups too, much smaller groups. But the ideas are the same. You're going to have 4 major sets of teams that are going to help turn the key on this. The first is an executive steering committee. That's that at a high level, driving culture change. Data governance committee, which will be focused on strategy. Your business user advisory teams of individual contributors who will be operating tactics. And your project development team, who's going to be facilitating this will be doing execution. We'll talk about all four of these a bit more. They're all going to be working together. Super important that there is regular and recurring interaction between these groups. First, the executive steering committee. The focus is going to be on culture, changing your organization to be data-driven and to really prioritize using data to make good decisions. In this example, there were 5 executives. Perhaps if your group is smaller, it might be a lower level, like a director or manager. But the idea is that you don't have too many people here, that you have perhaps roughly a half dozen folks really setting the tone for the org and able to provide true leadership. Meeting cadence quarterly, it might be a little bit more often than that to start, but I find that these folks often their calendars are very hard to get on, and getting them to commit to quarterly is perhaps the most you might be able to get out of them. The tasks that they're going to have on their plate, really driving awareness across the organization that data is important and that we're doing this. Provide leadership and act as a final decision-making authority when issues arise. They're going to be reviewing decisions and progress made by the other teams, and they're going to help resolve policy issues and org conflicts. The buck stops with these people. If there's any issues that run up the flagpole, this is where you're going to see them resolved. Turning over to the Data Governance Committee, the focus here is on strategy. They're going to be perhaps a dozen folks across the organization, a marketing person, an ops person, a finance person, etc., who are going to have skin in the game to really want this to go well because it will positively impact their piece of the organization. They meeting cadence perhaps monthly. I think whatever you agree on, it's super important that everyone is there every time. When people start checking out mentally and deciding this isn't that important, it can really rub off on everyone else. And so if these folks who have been assigned to this committee aren't taking it seriously, run it up the flagpole and get the executive steering committee involved and make sure everyone's attending. The tasks, driving awareness within their teams, with a smaller group of people in the organization, they're helping drive awareness of data-driven culture. They're going to be discussing and approving requests and initiatives like the requirements and the roadmap and all that. This is the team that's doing that. They're providing the major chunk of strategy. They're going to be monitoring progress, removing roadblocks, and they're going to be naming personnel to the business user advisory teams in our next section. This is not actually one group, it's actually a collection of groups who will be focusing on tactics. This, in my experience, in this example, was about 30 people in groups of 2 or 3 who will be meeting on an ad hoc basis to actually turn the key on this. These are the people who are worth their weight in gold in your organization, your subject matter experts, your people who understand a particular business process better than anyone else, who are going to help you understand and execute data governance problems. They're going to help implement and own solutions. They're going to identify new governance issues. They're going to develop and deploy the data definitions and business rules. And they're almost most importantly going to be recommending courses of action through their deep and intricate knowledge of the subject matter at hand. Finally, we turn over to the project development team. This is the team that's helping facilitate all this. This is a team that, in this example I was on, we're helping focus on execution. In this example, it's about 15 people in IT with me and the project manager and architects, developer, etc. Like lots of folks who are helping from a data perspective make this happen. Meeting cadence, weekly or ad hoc. We were having a daily stand-up. Your mileage may vary in that regard, but definitely regular meetings to make sure we're staying on top of this. This team is coordinating the execution of the other team, providing technical and data expertise to other teams, executing technical governance tasks, and generally stewarding the data, again, as owned by the business, but they are stewarding it, helping facilitate, provide data to the other teams to help solve these issues. Roles and responsibilities. With those teams set up, we then have to be very clear about what they're doing and not doing. Here's an example of what we call a RACI matrix. RACI stands for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. This is, we have folks across the columns here, and we have tasks along the rows here, right? So we have an intersection of Anne is responsible for task one and Brian's accountable for task one, etc. Responsible is who will do the task. Accountable is who will facilitate the task and vouch for its completion. Keep in mind there will only ever be one party who's actually accountable for something being done. There may be multiple people responsible for it, for doing it, or being consulted or informed that it was completed, but only one person or group will be really accountable for it. Consulted is who will provide assistance and insight for doing the task, and folks who are informed, who's going to be notified that this was worked on or is now done. I really highly recommend you never, ever, ever skip the step of assigning roles and responsibilities. How often have you been a part of an initiative, data governance or otherwise, where it wasn't clear what you were doing or not doing, what someone else is doing or not doing, and you could probably chalk the main reason for it not working up to the fact that this was not clearly defined up front. I've seen this happen time and time again, and so I absolutely advocate for doing this at the top of a really important initiative like this very strongly. Never, ever, ever, ever skip this step. I hope I've made myself clear. Personas. What kinds of roles are going to be interacting with the data? These are folks who are going to be touching it in some way, generating it, administrating it, consuming it, etc. Governance is much easier, in my experience, if you think of data in terms of how it's touched. Data governance is hard enough as it is, but if you can empathize, you can kind of put yourself into the role of someone who's going to be leveraging that data, like an administrator or an analyst, then it's just easier to think about it. Okay, am I getting what I need? How am I getting at it? Where are my pain points, etc. What kind of access does each role need to do its job? This is super important when it comes to setting up security and access. If you frame a security conversation around, okay, well, an administrator needs this, an analyst needs this, developer needs this, it just makes it easier to execute, we find. Here's a very high-level example, a pipeline of a sale from creation to consumption. We've got our customer who might need one kind of access, our service rep who needs another kind of access, system admin, database admin, accountant, analyst, developer, and then the executive who's consuming reports, managers, individual contributors. Just think about it. All these people are touching similar kinds of data, but they need different slices of it. They need different levels of access to it. And in a proper data governance initiative, we're right sizing for all of these roles. And so if we kind of think about our personas up front, then executing on proper security and access will just become so much easier. All right, moving on to data. What data domains are actually going to be governed in your data governance initiative? Sales, labor, etc. It's just super important to actually define what it is we're going to govern, right? And then once we've done that, we build a data dictionary that details for every data point both the things you're measuring and the attributes you're going to use to categorize those measurements. We have to solve a bunch of questions, answer a bunch of questions. First of all, what's its definition? How is it calculated, right? That might be the first thing you think of, but there's so many other things, like what is its description in plain English? How would you explain this data point or this attribute to anyone who's not a subject matter expert? How would you communicate this to the total layperson? The most important thing, I think, when it comes to this data dictionary is what is its name? And does everyone agree on the name? Remember the net sales example we brought up earlier, where we had 3 different business units using the same name? Well, when we're working cross-functionally, it exposes that problem. And then we need to rectify it. And all 3 of those groups might say, well, I'm going to call my thing net sales, and we're going to call your thing operating net sales or marketing net sales. No, we're not going to do that. They're all going to have distinct names, and the part of the data governance initiative will help resolve that. What tags or categories does it carry? Is this data point sensitive? Like, for example, are we going to carry social security number in the system? Are we going to carry personally identifiable information? Or from a data warehouse perspective, some more mundane categories like product category or sales territory or fiscal calendar. For this data point or for this attribute, what are the ways we might categorize it? How is it generated? How is it maintained? You don't have to write a novel about this, but it's pretty important to know, okay, this is how We actually generate our raw data that gets into this data point. How is it corrected? If something takes 3 weeks to fix, that's a problem. Understanding, exposing how something gets corrected when it's wrong is super important to good data governance and to high data quality. Who is its owner? Which business unit actually owns this thing? And remember, it's not IT. It's going to be a business unit. Who can access it? This is going to be very important when it comes to setting up security policies. You can't govern data if you can't define the data. And so I'll just make the point again. I think defining data gets skipped often with the data governance initiative with the implication it's already been done. And often we need to go back and do some of this work that you may expect would have already been done when it comes to getting down to implementing data governance. All right, finally, platform. Again, this is where this is our last component. And again, I wouldn't say it's our least important component, but it absolutely has to follow and flow from our previous components. This is where the rubber meets the road, but everything we've discussed so far needs to be figured out first. I encourage you to think of technology more as the where than the how. It is where our ideas will live, where we will provide a house to those policies. It isn't how we're going to execute. There may be some specific things to a particular technology you may have to work around, but it absolutely should not be wholesale defining how you're going to do something. If you have really committed to the other components, process, people, and data, this is the easy part. I believe that strongly. Your tasks define your tools, not the other way around. This is the 5th time I'm saying it. It's worth saying again, and I hope you agree with me. And a really important artifact that would come out of a platform exercise would be an architecture diagram. This is a high-level document that describes logical data flow of data in your organization. I would say arguably, if it doesn't already exist and you're creating it wholesale out of a governance initiative, it might be the most important document governance may produce, because then you can kind of just look at a concise one-pager and say, oh, this is what's going on. This is how data gets to my eyeballs from the source system it's coming out of. Any data governance participant should be able to understand this document. I'll give you just a really high-level example. You might get more specific than this, but this is just to illustrate what I'm talking about. Perhaps a customer kiosk is leveraged by customers and it's interacting with an Oracle sales database. And perhaps there's an employee interface where you input labor data into a SQL data warehouse, and that's living in Azure in this example. And there's another interface that goes into another SQL database for inventory. And then there's some pipelines in Azure Data Factory that might land into a SQL data warehouse. And then that might flow into an analysis services, tabular model. These are all Microsoft technologies, by the way, which may then flow into Excel and Power BI reports and dashboards. To be able to just explain at a high level, this is our kind of North Star. This is the thing that we're trying to turn the key on for doing better, for securing better, making data quality better, et cetera. Just so important to kind of align everyone across the organization on kind of where the rubber meets the road. One other point I'll make is that I think every arrow and icon on here should have supporting documentation, like the who, the what, the where, the when, but it's all under this umbrella, right? Like how exactly sales gets into the main data warehouse, how it's transformed, the actual data points, all of that stuff needs to live somewhere in a document that can be consumed. It's kind of a follow-on piece, a supporting document to this umbrella piece. So how do we do all this nimbly, right? I know this is all this kind of overwhelming, and you might be thinking that it's going to take forever to do. I do believe that these kinds of initiatives can be done in bite-sized chunks. I encourage you again to limit your scope one bite at a time. What has to be done right away? What can wait until later? Garbage in, garbage out. I think this is an important phrase, an important way to frame data. It can be extremely helpful to go to market in phase 1 and show off your data quality issues, as long as you can speak to them, of course, and they're not masquerading invisibly. If you can show people, hey, look, we have implemented a flow and we have our first stab at data governance, and here's our business intelligence initiative, which is bringing data to you. Here's our data quality issues, here's our access issues. Highlight the problem, right? Then in future phases, it kind of fosters an interest across the organization in moving forward on the second phase. Whereas if you had taken all of this time, waited until it was fully fixed, you may not have had full buy-in from the organization to move quickly on this initiative. So something to think about. An agile methodology. I really think it works with business intelligence hand in hand. I find often that people think, well, if it's a BI initiative, we can't use agile, and a data governance initiative is diametrically opposed to the idea of working in 2-week chunks. But I really think that that flows from the idea that we set up a timeline where we have to work in a waterfall kind of way, where by this particular date, we have to do this. If you think of tasks more in phases and sub-phases and sub-sub-phases down into sprints of 2 or 3 weeks or what have you, and you focus on what you got done and then roll things you didn't get done into the next sprint and just work like that, it can be a very healthy and successful way of moving forward on data governance. I will say though, there's no shortcut for defining and documenting upfront, but I promise you it will save you time when executing. This is just true across any initiative, but if you are willing to be proactive upfront, it will save you so much time being reactive after the fact. And that is absolutely true, perhaps doubly true when it comes to data governance. All right, so let's summarize everything we talked about and frame it as a checklist. Just be thinking about everything that we've talked about so far, and we'll just step through simple yes/no questions as to, do you think your organization is doing this well, or is there an opportunity? Is your org struggling with data quality and access issues? I could almost just say yes, of course it is in some way, but your definition of that may vary. Is your org ready to revisit its approach to governance? Often organizations don't have the appetite to tackle the issue at hand, and some sort of conversation, advocacy needs to occur first. If those things have occurred, has your org generated governance documents for, here's a list, the guiding principles we talked about, the mission statement, the requirements, our clear scope, the roadmap, what is our phases and our prioritization, governance teams, our data governance committee, our business user advisory teams, have those been set up? Our roles and responsibilities, what are folks responsible for, what are they not responsible for? Our personas, what are the groups of people who are going to be touching the data? Our data dictionary, what are the definition of all of our data points? The architecture diagram, how does our data flow, right? Finally, is your org open to letting the process define the platform? I had to sneak this in one more time. Our tasks define our tools. Can we let our process define the platform? Are folks open to that? Often I find people are very excited about data governance, but they are framing the conversation through the lens of, this is the technology we're going to use. How are we going to do data governance with it? And I just encourage you to flip that idea on its head. Some closing thoughts. Governance will never be 100% done on the first pass. You will get to the end of your first phase and it won't be everything you hoped and dreamed for. But if you're ready to jump back in the saddle and try again for a second phase, then that is where governance is quote unquote successful. Here's another quote from Gartner. Through 2022, it's really interesting, only 20% of organizations investing in information governance will succeed in scaling governance for digital business. I don't want that to feel like it's defeating you. I want to frame this by saying, only 20% of organizations are really going to hit fully what their goals are, and I would say 80% of organizations will still have gaps that they're going to need to focus on closing in subsequent phases. So I would highly encourage you to judge your success, quote unquote, on a spectrum and be ready to iterate. Become comfortable with the gray of data and data governance, both with the topics at hand and, of course, the gray on your head that it will introduce inevitably. So with that, I will leave you with a good luck. I'm really passionate about this topic, as it might seem clear, and I love hearing about people's stories. Feel free to reach out and tell me what your experience with data governance is. your frustrations with it. I want to wish you the best of luck with turning the key on this in your organization. With that, I'm going to turn it back to Mike.
Great, thanks, Sean, for some excellent content. Stick around, everyone, and get your questions into the question pane. In just a few minutes after we cover a few slides, we'll get to that Q&A. And again, if we can't answer the question, we'll put it in a response document. As discussed, data governance takes a lot of hard work to achieve, and you may be feeling a little overwhelmed right now. You heard terms like tough, ephemeral, cultural change, but it's well worth the investment implemented properly. So if you're going to do it right. Pulling together the key governance components of people and process at all levels of the organization is key to your success. And having knowledgeable consultants who can serve as arbiters, facilitate communication between stakeholders, and help you set up a solid framework to get you started on the right path can be a real help. To help you evangelize and build support within your organization, Senturus is offering this executive summary on our site. You can download it from the resource section there, where the deck and soon the recording will be. A few quick slides about Senturus. We are the authority in business intelligence. We concentrate our expertise solely on business intelligence with a depth of knowledge across the entire BI stack. At Senturus, our clients know us for providing clarity from the chaos of complex business requirements, disparate data sources, and constantly moving targets. We've made a name for ourselves because of our strength at bridging the gap between IT and business users. We deliver solutions that give you access to reliable, analysis-ready data across the organization so you can quickly and easily get answers at the point of impact, the decisions you make, and the actions you take. Our consultants are leading experts in the field of analytics with years of pragmatic real-world experience and experience advancing the state of the art. We're so confident in our team and our methodology that we back our projects with a 100% money-back guarantee that is unique in the industry. And we've been doing this for a while. We've been at this for nearly 2 decades, and we have worked across the spectrum ranging from Fortune 500 down to the mid-market, solving business problems across many industries and functional areas, including the Office of Finance, Sales and Marketing, Manufacturing, Operations, HR, and IT. The team at Senturus is both large enough to meet all your business analytics needs, yet small enough to provide personalized attention. We invite you to expand your knowledge. We have hundreds of free resources available on our website there at senturus.com/senturus-resources, and go visit that and bookmark it. While you're there, check out our events page. On the next slide, Sean will be adding an October, we have an event coming up on September 24th, how to successfully implement self-service analytics. That'll be at the, we always do these on Thursdays, 11 to 12 Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern, so you can go register for that there. And we'll be adding an October 8th webinar on data architecture with a focus on Microsoft. So look for that email if you're on our mailing list in about a week. We'd be remiss if we didn't discuss our complete BI training offerings across the top 3 BI platforms, Cognos, Tableau, and Power BI. We're particularly ideal for organizations that run multiple platforms or are moving from one to the other. We can provide training in many different modes, whether it's tailored group sessions, one-to-one, one-to-few mentoring, instructor-led online courses, or virtual self-paced learning, and we can mix and match those to meet the needs of your user community. And then finally, before we get to the Q&A, some great additional resources. We literally have hundreds of these on our website, and we've been committed to sharing our BI expertise with all of you for over a decade now. I will jump over the Q&A. Again, if you have questions, please feel free to put them into the questions pane and we will get to them. We have about 10 minutes left here. So Sean, I don't know if you had a chance to take a look at those, but we had a question about the RACI matrix that you put up there, and is one person, can they have more than one role, such as responsible and accountable?
It's funny. I love this question because if we've gotten down to the point where we're looking at it like this, then I think we've done some good work, right? I would encourage folks to not assign more than one role to someone, but if a team is small enough, it may be necessary. If perhaps a manager is a heavy individual contributor as well, they may be both the person responsible and accountable. But I would encourage folks to start from the default of not doing that and accepting that if that's the way it has to be.
Great. What would you recommend for smaller organizations? That's kind of a nice segue. If you have 50 employees or less, how would you sort of scale that down so they can manage it?
Totally. So the idea of those 4 groups still absolutely is applicable. It's just who's going to sit on them will be different. And just like the previous question where one person may have more than one role, a person may sit on more than one of those groups, but it's important to think of the hats that person wears as separate, right? So if with a group of 50 employees or less, let's say 50 people, then you may have only 1 or 2 people on the executive steering committee. You may only have 3 or 4 people on the data governance committee. You may have, let's say, 10 people on the in the business user advisory teams, and maybe even just 1 or 2 people on the project dev team. It just it all scales down, perhaps in the numbers, but the tasks, the roles, the need, that's all still exactly the same.
Sounds good. Can you talk about challenges in convincing executives to start with data governance and how you overcame those blockages?
Oof. How much time you got? It's absolutely different from organization to organization, and that's where the kind of role that I serve often transcends just being a data jockey and becoming a therapist or an advocate or a project manager. Um, it starts with being able to show an organization, an executive, their own issues. It can't just start with perhaps a, a more heady conversation that's kind of abstract. It has to be grounded in the issues at hand. And if we turn that to the definition of data governance we gave earlier, how can we show an executive not only the issues surrounding accessibility or security or availability, but what are the problems it's causing in the organization? How do we draw a line from that issue over to, and it's costing you X in time, X in money? Because ultimately, executives spend a lot of the time thinking about roadmap and budget and what have you. And if you can draw the pain point over to it's costing us something now, or it could be costing us something in the future, then that's where their eyes will light up. And that's where they will be more excited in being a data champion. I would also say finding someone at a higher level of the organization who groks data, who understands data, who is savvy with data, who is passionate about data, because then they're already speaking your language. This person may not exist in your org, but I have often found that if you look across the leadership, you will find someone who cut their teeth on really heavy Excel spreadsheets, or they themselves are a technology person, and they understand the language and they understand the pain points, they understand what it takes to solve it, and they're passionate about helping you execute on solving that. So I wish I had a more concise answer than that. It really will depend across organizations, but that is at a high level how I would start with that kind of conversation.
I think that's a great answer. I mean, you have to find the pain, right? Where is it affecting the
Yeah.
company in terms of revenue, customer satisfaction, whatever the things are that keep your executives up at night?
Yeah.
This gentleman was trying to challenge us, I think, by stretching this question across 5 different panes. But I think what they're suggesting is that data governance could be compared to the same process that you go through in developing business intelligence assets, and sort of saying that the governance that you need for good reporting is the same as it is for data governance. And is there overlap there, and what's your view on that?
They're so joined at the hip. I would say that so much of what I've helped implement with clients for data governance was happening part and parcel with an existing or starting business intelligence initiative. And I often, as a consultant, helping an organization, am coming in with certain questions, trying to define, okay, are my prerequisites there to be able to move forward with good reporting and analytics? And that a huge plank there is data governance. And is the data of high quality? Can people get to it? Can I, as an architect, get to it? Can I help you show off that data? And often there are certain prerequisites, certain documents that don't exist. So going back and helping craft those things can only occur if a data governance organization is established. And sometimes we can slot into an existing data governance framework. Often I've had to create it greenfield. And in either case, in most of my engagements, there has been at least a little bit, if not often a lot, of helping craft the organization's data governance and having to put the BI initiative not necessarily on the back burner. You need to move forward with that, but it helps highlight the data governance problem, and then that's solved, and then you can move forward fully with a high quality BI solution.
Yeah, it seems to me that the data governance is a broader topic, of which the governance for a specific reporting initiative is a subset of that. And so thinking
Yeah.
about it more systematically probably requires more resource, more planning. But the reuse and the potential benefits, I think, are greater than. How about can you speak to reconciliation processes that give confidence in your data sets?
So to be able to say this number is correct, absolutely, like going all the way back to a source system and seeing what it says there, and then following it all the way through your data flows down to the last piece of the puzzle, perhaps the reports and dashboards that are being put in front of auditors, to be able to tie those numbers out, and if they're being changed, which they almost certainly are being transformed in some way, to be weighing that against documented policies that describe why and how data is being transformed is of critical importance. To be able to in that architecture diagram that I showed earlier, to be able to put your finger down on the piece of paper and follow the lines all the way through and say, this is happening here, this is happening here, this is happening here, and that's why this $200 number became $185.54. That starts with documentation. It starts with having access to that source system. I often find I'm not, as an architect involved in these kinds of initiatives, not necessarily at first given access to the where the data is being generated. It's only in some intermediary spot that some transformations have already occurred that I'm being given access. And so I often ask, well, okay, you have concerns about this number not matching. Let's get access to let's get under the hood in that original spot where it's being made, and I want you to show me what's going on. And that often will highlight the problem, but it comes down to tying the discrepancies to what should be occurring, and almost certainly almost always in my experience, that is sufficient to getting to why the numbers might disagree.
Good stuff. Well, we're at the top of the hour here. So I want to be mindful of everybody's time here. So with that, I think we'll wrap it up. So Sean, if you want to advance to the last slide. First of all, a huge thank you to you, Sean, for a fabulous presentation. Again, this presentation and a recording of the presentation will be available on Senturus.com. And we hope that for you, thank you in the audience for joining us today. As always, if you have any business intelligence needs, we hope you'll reach out to us either at our website. If you're old school and still use a phone, we have a 888 number, or you can always email us at info@senturus.com. So thank you for your time today. We look forward to seeing you on the next installment of the Senturus Knowledge Series. Thanks and have a great rest of your day.